If you've ever looked at a beautiful digital landscape and thought, I wish I could paint something like that, then this video is exactly for you. In this video, I'm going to show you the complete process of painting a landscape in digital art, from the very first rough sketch all the way to the final detailed artwork. We'll start by building a strong composition, then move into adding base colors to create atmosphere, and finally bring the entire scene to life with lighting, textures, and small details that make the painting feel magical. The best part is that you don't need to be an expert artist to follow along. Even if you're a beginner who only knows how to use the brush and eraser, this process will help you understand how digital landscapes are actually built step by step. By the end of this video, you won't just see the final result. You'll understand how each stage transforms a blank canvas into a full digital landscape. So if you want to learn how to turn simple shapes and colors into a beautiful environment, grab your tablet, open your drawing software, and let's start painting this landscape together. Every artwork starts with a simple idea, and for this piece my goal was to create a calm, magical moment between a small child and a giant spirit creature. So the first thing I started with was the sketching stage, where I focused completely on composition and storytelling rather than details. At the beginning, I used a very rough brush to block out the basic shapes. Instead of drawing perfectly clean lines, I allowed the sketch to stay messy because the purpose of this stage is only to capture the idea. I placed the small character slightly off-center in the canvas so that the viewer's eyes naturally move from the character toward the giant dragon-like creature behind them. This positioning helps create a sense of scale and also adds emotional depth to the scene. The most important element in this composition is the large spirit creature that curves across the entire frame. While sketching it, I focused on creating a smooth, flowing shape so that the body naturally guides the viewer's eyes across the artwork. Its long body forms almost an arc over the character, which gives the impression that the creature is protecting or watching over the child. Next, I sketched the environment. Instead of filling the entire background with heavy details, I kept the landscape simple and atmospheric. I added soft mountain shapes in the distance and some rough indications of plants and flowers in the foreground. These elements help frame the scene and create depth, but they don't distract from the main characters. Another important thing during the sketch stage is checking the proportions and balance. The child needs to feel small compared to the giant creature, so I made sure the creature's body takes up most of the composition while the character remains small and simple. This contrast helps emphasize the magical scale of the creature. I also paid attention to the character's pose. The child is standing calmly and looking forward, which creates a peaceful feeling rather than a dramatic one. Small decisions like posture and body language can completely change the emotion of an artwork. At the end of the sketching stage, the drawing is still very rough, but the foundation of the artwork is already clear. The composition, the characters, and the overall mood are established. This stage might look simple, but it is actually one of the most important parts of the entire process, because a strong sketch makes every later step much easier. Once I was satisfied with the sketch and the placement of all the elements, I moved on to the next stage of the process, blocking in the base colors. After finishing the sketch, the next step is adding base colors, which is where the artwork starts to feel alive. At this stage, the goal is not to create perfect lighting or details yet. Instead, I focus on establishing the main color palette and the overall atmosphere of the scene. The first thing I did was create a soft background gradient to represent the sky and distant environment. I used light pastel tones and slightly desaturated colors to create a dreamy atmosphere. Since the scene is meant to feel calm and magical, I avoided very harsh or overly dark colors at this stage. Next, I filled in the large shapes of the environment. The distant mountains were painted with soft blue and gray tones, so they feel far away and atmospheric. Using lighter and less saturated colors in the background helps create depth, which makes the foreground elements stand out more clearly. After that, I moved to the foreground plants and flowers. For these elements, I used brighter greens and yellows. These colors help create contrast with the softer background tones and also add life to the scene. Even though the plants are not the main focus, They play an important role in framing the composition. Then I started adding the base colors for the main characters. The giant spirit creature was painted with a combination of soft turquoise and pale green tones. These colors give the creature a mystical and nature-like feeling. Because the creature is such a large part of the composition, choosing the right color here is extremely important. For the child character, I kept the colors simple and natural. A light green shirt and darker shorts help the character stand out slightly from the background without overpowering the scene. Keeping the character's colors simple also helps maintain the calm mood of the artwork. During the base color stage, I mainly worked with large brushes and avoided fine details. The goal is simply to define the main color areas and ensure that everything works together visually. I also frequently zoomed out of the canvas to check how the colors looked from a distance. This helps make sure the composition remains clear and balanced. Another important part of this stage is separating elements using layers. Keeping the character, creature, and background on different layers makes it much easier to adjust colors and lighting later without affecting the entire painting. By the end of the base color stage, the artwork already starts to look recognizable. The scene has clear shapes, a defined color palette, and a strong atmosphere. However, it still lacks the textures, lighting, and smaller elements that truly bring the piece to life. That is exactly what the next stage focuses on: adding details and refining the artwork. Once the base colors are finished, the artwork enters one of the most satisfying stages of the process: adding details and refining the painting. This is where the scene begins to feel more alive and visually rich. The first thing I focused on was improving the lighting. I added soft highlights and shadows across the environment to create a sense of depth and atmosphere. The light source in this artwork appears to come from the left side of the scene, which creates warm highlights on the plants and subtle shadows behind the characters. Next, I started refining the giant spirit creature. Since it is the most important visual element in the artwork, I carefully added texture and form to its body. I used slightly darker tones to emphasize the curves and segments along its body, which helps create a sense of volume. I also added subtle highlights along the top edges where the light touches the creature. The creature's head was another important focal point. I refined the shape of the eyes, nose, and facial features so the creature feels calm and gentle rather than threatening. Small adjustments to facial expressions can dramatically affect how viewers emotionally interpret the character. After that, I moved to the environment details. I added more variety to the plants and flowers in the foreground by introducing small shapes and color variations. These details help make the environment feel natural and vibrant while still keeping the focus on the main characters. Another important step was adding atmospheric effects. I softly blended parts of the background to create a misty feeling around the mountains. This technique helps push the background further away and enhances the sense of depth in the scene. Also made small adjustments to the character. Even though the character is relatively simple, adding subtle shadows and highlights helps integrate them better into the environment. This ensures the character doesn't feel flat compared to the rest of the painting. Finally, I performed some overall color adjustments to unify the scene. Sometimes small tweaks to saturation or brightness can help the entire artwork feel more cohesive. I also checked the composition one last time to ensure the viewer's eye naturally flows from the foreground plants to the child and finally toward the giant spirit creature. At this point, the artwork is complete. What started as a rough sketch has now transformed into a fully realized digital painting filled with atmosphere, color, and storytelling. And that is the entire process behind creating this magical scene. And that's the complete process of how I painted this digital landscape, starting from a simple sketch, building the base colors, and finally adding all the details that bring the scene to life. As you can see, creating a landscape in digital art isn't about making everything perfect from the beginning. It's about building the artwork step by step and letting each stage guide the next one. If you're learning digital art, remember that practice is the most important part. The more landscapes you paint, the better you'll understand composition, color, and lighting. So don't worry if your first few paintings don't look exactly how you imagined. Every artwork is a chance to improve and develop your own style. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new today, make sure to support the channel by liking the video and subscribing for more digital art tutorials and painting processes like this one. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like to see in future videos, feel free to leave them in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.